Now, Human Rights Watch has urged Mozambique authorities to take urgent measures to protect civilians fleeing an armed group in the town of Palma. I'm joined via Skype by Southern Africa Director at Human Rights Watch, Dewa Mavinga. Mr. Mavinga, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to The Globe.
Thank you, Simpio, for having me on the show. Thank you.
Now, we know that there have been attacks since Wednesday and there have been attempts to rescue some of those trapped there. So what's the latest? What do we know at the moment?
Yeah, what we know is that it has been very difficult to have these rescue operations, and also that communication has broken down, has been disrupted because mobile phone signals were interfered with. And we know that this has really been a vicious attack by extremist Islamist group, which is known locally as Al-Shabaab or Al-Sunnah wa Jama'ah, which is linked, as you correctly said, to the Islamic State. And we know that there have been killings and wounding of an unknown number of people. And this has triggered mass flight. We spoke to witnesses who said they saw bodies on the streets as residents fled the town as the militants attacked in buildings, including local bank branches and local hotels. So the situation is volatile, is escalating. If you look at how there has been this crisis in Cabo Delgado for a few years now, which has displaced over 600,000 people. And we believe that this is the time now for Mozambique and its neighbors, including South Africa, within the Southern African Development Community, to take swift action to protect civilians and to bring this to an end before it spreads to engulf the entire Southern Africa region.
Why wasn't there early warnings about the potential attacks in the area, Dewa, given what's been happening in the whole Cabo Delgado area?
Well, I think generally there hasn't been priority given to these attacks and to the security situation in Cabo Delgado because this has been happening in different towns. But in fact, just before these attacks in Palma, there was a sense that Palma was secure and safe. And it seems that perhaps this daring, audacious attack was a way of sending out a statement of the capacity of this group to disrupt and cause mass damage. And the killings have been, and the shootings recorded have been indiscriminate in a way and unlawfully targeting civilians. So it's a clear sign that the situation is escalating, is not getting better, and that perhaps the Mozambican authorities have been underprepared and have given insufficient priority to this urgent crisis.
Now, there's been heavy fighting, as we know, since the 25th of March, when the group known locally as both Al-Shabaab and Al-Sunnah wa Jama'ah linked to the Islamic State as, they raided the gas-rich town. You were quoted as having said that Al-Shabaab fired on civilians in their homes and on the streets in Palma. Can you confirm for sure, with a high degree of certainty, that it was indeed Al-Shabaab, or it was a multiplicity of other militant groups?
Well, yes, according to the witnesses that we spoke to, yes, it was indeed Al-Shabaab. And in fact, some of the residents who were fleeing were identifying this group as Al-Shabaab. But it is possible that it could involve other groups or affiliated to the Islamic State. What we know is that not enough is known about these groups, their motives, and what they are doing there. But it is clear that for those that we spoke to who were fleeing, they identified and said it was indeed the group locally known as Al-Shabaab.
And it's clear that the Mozambique insurgency is not only a Mozambican problem, but a regional problem. So what is your analysis in terms of the readiness of the neighboring countries to deal with a potential problem, as a result of this insurgency?
Well, simply the silence of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, has been deafening. There hasn't been any clear plan of action to intervene and resolve this crisis. South Africa should also take this much more seriously, because after Cabo Delgado, it could be the entire Mozambique, and it could affect South Africa more directly. And we already know that Tanzania, to the north of Mozambique, is already affected, and we have been receiving indications that perhaps some of the fighters might have connections to the crisis and the insurgency in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this crisis is rapidly taking a regional scope and focus, and yet SADC is not stepping up. It has not said much. It has done next to nothing. This is the time for action.
So what would your ideal response plan by SADC be?
Well, to begin with, it's clear that Mozambique is inadequately prepared in terms of its authorities to address the crisis and to resolve the issues and restore peace and security. That's number one. Number two, we have also, as Human Rights Watch, documented abuses by the Mozambican security forces in their attempt to reassert authority and control over Cabo Delgado generally. So there is need to support and also to train and ensure that the responses by the authorities are adequate and effective, but also respectful of the rule of law and human rights. So these are the important markers that need to be there. But at the moment, SADC is not on the ground. We have also received and been receiving disturbing reports of pockets of mercenaries really being involved and also being involved in serious human rights abuses. We have documented beheadings of people and forced disappearances and perhaps forced recruitments. We have also documented attacks targeting specifically children, girls and women, and these things need to come to an end, and they can only be brought to an end if SADC prioritizes what's happening, urgently convenes a special summit focusing on Mozambique, and sends in operational support. South Africa has previously said at the highest level that perhaps they were waiting for Mozambique to invite them. But now is the time for SADC to say, no, we will not wait for an invitation to resolve this crisis, because the neighbor side is burning and there is need for a resolution before the matter goes out of hand completely.
And it's quite interesting that you say that, Dewa, because, early last year, before the coronavirus pandemic even hit the country, Mozambique sent cries for help to the SADC, for assistance of some sort. But today we're having this conversation. Why is that so? I mean, is it a capacity problem on the part of SADC?
It might be a capacity problem on the part of SADC, but what I know in engagements with SADC in Botswana at the secretariat level is that SADC does have an early warning system that is in place. And this system, if it is working, it should have been triggered, activated to send red flags about what is happening now. And also, Simpiwe, look, the president of Mozambique, Filipe Nyusi, is now the chairperson of SADC. And therefore, that should be an opportunity for him to say, as chairperson, to mobilize support from the entire SADC region for a collective focus to help resolve this matter. We know that Mozambique has been speaking to the United States and others, to France, to the EU, to the UK. But it's much more important to focus on the neighbors, on SADC, because this is where the greatest help will come from.
Well, the government has long been secretive about the insurgency in Cabo Delgado, just viewing it as, as a result of local criminal activity in the local regions. As a matter of fact, they even denied the presence of jihadis. Can the government be blamed or partially blamed for this insurgency that's brewing seemingly out of control?
Well, clearly the Mozambican authorities must take responsibility for underplaying the seriousness of this issue, and for sometimes also preventing access to information, preventing journalists from properly covering this crisis. We have not yet, even for Human Rights Watch, with people on the ground, we have had difficulties in accessing Cabo Delgado generally. So yes, Mozambique must take responsibility. It must open up. It must be very forthright and clear about the extent of this crisis and challenge, and request for its neighbors to step in, and also for those beyond SADC, the African Union, the Peace and Security Council. It must be seized with the matter of Mozambique as a matter of urgency.
Well, are you also of the view that this current insurgency in northern Mozambique is a temporary problem and will be dealt with decisively by the authorities? Or are we looking at northern Mozambique becoming the epicenter of Islamist extremism?
Well, if nothing is done, then there is a huge risk that northern Mozambique could become really the epicenter of extremism and the new base for the Islamic State in southern Africa. But if clear steps are taken on time, and if SADC intervenes and coordinates and reaches out to the African Union and other supporters beyond, then something can be done to resolve this crisis. What Mozambique and SADC and the African Union cannot afford to do, is to remain silent and inactive, because civilians' lives are being lost. People are not secure. There are no resources in terms of public health, even in this context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools are not functional in the province, and hundreds of thousands of school kids are not going to school. So this is something that needs to be a top agenda priority for SADC, for Mozambique, and for the African Union.
Dewa Mavinga, so the Southern Africa Director at Human Rights Watch, joining us via Skype. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Simpio. Thank you.